Hello everyone who enjoys watching my videos for some reason. I want to explain what this video is before you watch it. A weird move, I know, but this is admittedly a weird video. This is a history video about YuGiOh from 2015 to 2017, and it is also a story video about my personal journey through the competitive landscape of the game. If you're not into YuGiOh, you might not like this. If you don't like listening to me waffle on, you also might not like this. But for those of you who stay, I hope you enjoy. So, my name is Ash. The year was 2014, and I'd just finished high school. I don't really know what finishing high school is like for other people, but for me it was a surprisingly lonely time in my life. A lot of the friends I knew went off to university, but I didn't. Other friends of mine jumped into full-time jobs, but I didn't. Instead, I ended up getting a casual one-day-a-week job, and I was still living with my parents. I was part of a fiercely close group in high school, but coming out of it, we fragmented, and the days of Christmas and New Year's for me bled into lonely walks alone and games of League of Legends. Nothing really lasts forever, and thankfully for me, neither does loneliness. An old friend from high school came a-knockin', and his name was Brett. I would describe Brett as the most loyal person I ever met. He was the type of guy who, if someone slapped you, he would charge that person to the ground. Him and I got locked into a fierce friendship shortly following high school, playing all sort of games together, usually at his house. Call of Duty Zombies, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Monster Hunter Generations, and later, he showed me that a buddy of his had gotten him into a little game called YuGiOh. YuGiOh was a beloved card game from my childhood. I grew up having a toy dual disc, watching the original anime, and then later GX. God have mercy on my soul. I had built a few decks, like a hero deck and a hosh-posh of random dragons and crap deck. I got out of the game as I became a teenager for two reasons. One, I thought that the newest anime 5Ds was stupid, since the characters were riding around on motorcycles, and as a child I also thought that the GX anime was just cooler, mainly because the monsters in that one had way bigger attack point stats, and at that point I hadn't really learned what a good effect was, so 5Ds with its interesting and dynamic monster effects didn't make much sense to my unga bunga big numbers brain. The other reason was because I was afraid of getting teased for liking YuGiOh in high school. During high school, I dropped YuGiOh and never went back. It didn't really end up working out for me though, as I'd failed to consider the possibility that I would ultimately get teased anyway for being a fucking loser, but that's for another time. Brett showed me that he was getting into YuGiOh though, with his sleeves and deck box reignited something within me. The next time we hung out, I brought my old hero deck, which didn't even have sleeves, and I got completely gutter stomped. We dueled again and again, and I knew it was bad when Brett started to obviously get bored of, winning, and asked to play zombies or something else. Not me though. Every time I lost, it was like a fire inside me started to burn, brighter and brighter. Again, I would say, and again and again. Not once did I ever even come close to defeating Brett, but it didn't matter. The fire was lit, and the only thought that entered my brain was the idea of defeating him. I remember I went home, I thought about my losses a lot. Like it or not, Brett had a more modern deck, an outright better deck, something that my heroes from almost a decade ago couldn't stand up to. If I wanted to win, I'd have to try other strategies. Brett at the time was playing something called a wind-up deck, which to this day is still one of the coolest decks I've ever seen. It was an XYZ deck, a type of deck that was foreign to my brain. As long as Brett had two monsters of the same level, he could stack them on top of each other to make an XYZ monster, usually his boss monster, Zenmanes, who was a real problem for me to beat, as it could protect itself and then destroy my monsters. Making it for Brett was as easy as breathing, and any combination of wind-up cards plus a wind-up shark could do it. Wind-up rat could easily make more and more copies of it, he could just pump one out every single turn, and it didn't take much for him to make it. My hero deck, on the other hand, I'd have to spend almost all of my cards in my hand to even attempt at attacking it. And then when I did so, Zenmanes would protect itself and I'd get destroyed. I used to be the king of the playground, but the old tricks weren't working anymore. I rummaged through my old box of cards I collected as a child, and then that is when I found it. Stardust Dragon. The synchro monster that I had largely disregarded as a child. Well, I was ready to give them another chance. I found better spells and traps, a variety of tuners, non-tuners, monsters who could summon themselves, replace themselves, and more. I remember I would lay my cards out, just sprawled all out on my floor and thinking of all the best options available to me. Considering option after option, putting one card in and trying the deck out, just to throw the card out and then try again and again. I didn't know it at the time, but I was labbing, and this was my first go at it, and it was fun in a way I never expected it to be. YuGiOh was a game with thousands upon thousands of cards. I didn't even know what half of them did, so exploring and experimenting, trying to build something that would beat Brett was some of the most fun I ever had. I ended up building a deck that looked something like this, notably not even having enough cards to fill out the extra deck, but it was a start, and then I messaged Brett and challenged him again, and it went... Well, it didn't go much better, but I remember there was a moment where Brett didn't draw a good hand, but I did, and over a few short, nail-biting turns, I clutched out a lucky win. And this one win, this singular win, would completely change my life. Because it was at this moment that I learned that I liked winning. I don't know if it was to encourage me or because he felt threatened by me, but Brett later took me to our local card shop, a place called Game Traders. He showed me how to look at the binders, how to skim through the bulk cards, and together, one pack, $1, one card at a time, we each began to upgrade our decks. I got new cards like Armades and Ally of Justice Catasta, and other main deck monsters as well, like Plague Spreader Zombie and Debris Dragon. Brett, however, also got some new cards, like 101 Silent Honor Arc and C101 Silent Honor Dark, as well as the rank up spell to make it. He found some new traps and his deck got scarier and scarier. This was the first cycle of what would become a weekly ritual for the two of us. Every week, we would play. Brett would win, but I'd sneak a win here and there, and then we'd go upgrading our decks bit by bit. I always felt like out of the two of us, my deck usually received the better upgrades, but that's mainly because it wasn't as good of a deck, so it had more room to grow. I slowly learned some cool tricks, mainly tricks on how to deal with the Zenmanes, like using Black Rose Dragon to nuke the field, so then Zenmanes had to target itself with its pop effect. Or getting lucky double triggers on Zenmanes, using things like Red Dragon Archfiend and Catasta. I was slowly getting better and better. I was winning more and more. Not as consistently as I would have liked, and generally if Brett opened a good hand, then I still had no real way of beating him or stopping him. But him and I were in an arms race now, both sprinting towards the same question. Who was the better duelist between the two of us? As the weeks went by, my win rate slowly started to rise, from 10% to 20 to 35 and so on. I think it all came down to this one night. I had Brett over at my house for a sleepover, and all we did all day was play YuGiOh. And Guitar Hero as well. And Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, but a lot of YuGiOh. We had a mutual friend there with us named Crystal, who isn't important to the story, but later on she would become my wife, so that's cool. All night we had been trading wins back and forth, and finally we were on a score of 3 wins to me and 3 wins to Brett. So at the early hours of 3 in the morning, with Crystal sleeping and the menu music of Guitar Hero in the background, Brett and I shuffled cards and got ready to have our tiebreaker in what would become the longest duel of my life. Brett started with an insane board. A board that no 5-card combination in my deck could break, so instead all I could really do was chip at it. Turn by turn, play by play, I would chip into Brett's board, and turn by turn he would reinforce it and chip into mine. He had a trap card that let him constantly reattach cards from his hand or field to his XYZ monsters. Meanwhile, I was stuck reviving Stardust Dragon every single turn. This deciding game of ours had turned into more than me versus Brett, but also Stardust Dragon versus Wind Up Zenmanes. Perhaps even more than that, Synchro versus XYZ. And perhaps even more than that, Old School versus New School. The The first hour of the duel flew by. The second hour was a repeating slog. Turn after turn, pop after pop, revive after revive, reattaching, resummoning, recycling. Our decks got lower and lower. Our extra decks were getting exhausted of options. Brett tried using Silent Honor Arc to suck up my Stardust Dragon, so I had to destroy his Honor Arc and revive my Stardust Dragon with Call of the Haunted to get it back in rotation. It was an insane amount of options, responses, and responses to responses that we were throwing at each other. It was finally at 6:45 in the morning, after nearly 4 continuous hours of play in a single game, that I was finally able to break through. The cards in my hand were enough to rebuild my own board, which led me to one final push, where I finally bested Brett. Crystal woke up to ask if we'd really been playing this whole time, to which we said that we were playing literally just that single game that went on for 4 hours. She called us nerds and went back to sleep. We called it there. We ate some macas in the morning, played some Guitar Hero, but finally Brett had gone home, whilst I held the positive game score. It had taken so much work, so much experimentation, so many losses, but I had done it. I won. And after I won, there was no going back. I was addicted to winning. Brett and I would continue to play, and despite my one-off winning, it was hard to repeat that success. But what I can say was from that night onwards, we were rivals, and our win-loss was a solid 50-50. We were equals, constantly pushing each other. This was about the time that I managed to recruit 2 more people into this whole YuGiOh saga. Cue in Nick and Jacob. Now, Nick and Jacob are 2 of my best friends to this day. I was talking to them about YuGiOh, and on the side I had slowly been putting together a Cyber Dragon deck. So using that, plus my Synchro deck, I showed them the ropes of the game, and they, like me, got instantly hooked. Jacob suggested hosting a little tournament at his place for the fun of it, and excitedly I agreed. Now, allow me to quickly roll call everyone who went to this thing. There was me, and I invited Brett, and Brett invited his friend, Martin. Remember that name for later. Nick and Jacob went, and Nick invited his friend who used to play at tournaments named Bo, and Jacob invited his friend who actually goes to tournaments named Zach. So, including myself, Ash, Brett, Nick, Jacob, Martin, Bo, and Zach. Needless to say, it was going to be a big night. Now before we get into Jacob's tournament, I want to talk a little bit about Martin. Martin was actually the person who got Brett into YuGiOh. And while I thought Brett was the man to beat, I never stopped to consider that Brett had the exact same thought process with Martin. Martin was in a different class altogether. He actually went to tournaments with his dad, and together the 2 of them crushed it. Martin ran a mixture of both Synchro and XYZ cards in a deck called Evil Swarm. He would summon oppressive monsters like Evil Swarm Ophion that would effectively lock me out of playing the game, and then would summon cards like Beals of the Diabolic Dragon, which was literally unkillable. Brett and I had played with Martin before, even doing a 2 versus 1 duel, and even then, we didn't even come close to winning. Brett was my rival, but Martin, he was the final boss. Fast forward to Saturday, and it was the day of Jacob's basement tournament. In early anticipation of it, I had snuck off in the morning to go look at cards at Game Traders, and who else did I find there but Martin? After a brief bit of talking, Martin eventually convinced me that it was a good idea for me to buy a box of cards. I didn't really know what was in any of them, but Martin convinced me to buy something called the Secret Forces. Holy shit. Martin invited me over to his place and mentioned we could go together to Jacob's later. Together we ripped the box open, and I started to discover a whole new way to play the game. You see, the deck I'd been playing up until this point was a pure synchro deck, indicated by these white cards here. The Secret Forces gave me a new colour to play with. Blue. Necros consists of a series of ritual monsters. Ritual monsters being these blue cards that sit in your main deck as opposed to your extra deck, meaning that to summon them you have to draw them. That certainly didn't hurt Necros though, as each card had both a discard effect and an on-field effect. In my first box of Secret Forces, I pulled a Unicorn, a Clausulus, a Charette, and a Valkyrus. Oh, and a Decisive Armor. I slapped together the ugliest, roughest 40 card deck you've ever seen, and in a weird duel, beat Martin. Quite badly, in fact. He literally wasn't allowed to play the game. The deck was messy, it was bricky, it was rough, I had no idea how to play it, or what the optimal line was, but somehow, to my surprise, I liked it, and I could tell that it had so much potential. I sleeved it up, packed it up, and went to Jacob's. Our little tournament had begun. Bo was running his old school zombie synchro deck. Martin and Brett brought evil swarms and wind-ups respectively. Nick and Jacob didn't have decks, but thankfully I had 3, so Nick got synchro, my main deck, and Jacob got cyber dragons. And I decided to run, at what I thought was a disadvantage, my new, rough, broken, incomplete Necros deck. Then there was Jacob's friend Zach, who played... the literal coolest deck I have ever seen, Chaos. It was my first ever look at a concept I would soon become familiar with, the concept of a deck engine. Zach's deck wasn't really a deck. It was more like 4 decks in one, all working together and bouncing off one another. Firstly, he ran a small Burning Abyss and Lightsworn package to help him mill cards from the top of his deck to the graveyard, very, very quickly. He then ran a Dragon package that enjoyed having stuff in the graveyard, things like Dark Arm Dragon, Eclipse Wyvern, etc. And finally, he played the Chaos cards, White Dragon Wyvern Buster, Black Dragon Collapse Serpent, Light Pulsar Dragon, Chaos Sorcerer, Black Luster Soldier, heavy hitters. Zach's deck was explosive, it was dynamic, he had a stacked deck and an even more stacked extra deck. And it made for genuinely one of the coolest decks I've ever gotten to verse. And it was a deck that kicked my ass over and over and over again. It became very quickly apparent that Zach and his Chaos deck was the opponent to beat. We played free-for-alls, doubles, round robins, whatever we felt like, and whatever was fun. But at the end, it was who else but Zach versus Martin. one Titan against another. And try as he might, Martin could not defeat Zach's cards. Ophion didn't help much against XYZ cards. Beals, try Blackluster Soldier. Zach dismantled the competition and left undefeated. Despite the results, there was one surprising thing about that night. Necros. It slapped. Being able to lock people out of special summoning, being able to turn off extra deck effects, using quick battle traps with decisive armor, Manjus for the search, and the recyclability with the spells and YuGiOh, cheating out monsters using Kaleidoscope. It was a fierce deck, and it was crazy how much I could dish out considering how incomplete the deck was. I was running just complete filler in between the cards I wanted to see, but when I drew good, it was explosive. It was a fun night, like one of those nights that you never really forget. Fun, friends, games, the good times of being young, unemployed, carefree. This night would forever put me on a different road though. Necros was a smash hit, and I sure as hell wasn't going to stop halfway done. I no longer had a desire to beat Brett. I didn't want to ever lose to him ever again, and I had just found a way how. I'm slightly not proud of what I'm about to say next. It's cringe, I know, but saving week to week with my 1 day a week job, I went to Game Traders with Jacob and bought 6 booster boxes of Secret Forces. Yep, 6. I also had the foresight to order some copies of Senju to go along with my Manju, meaning that I now had a Decisive Armor, 3 Claws, 3 YuGiOh, 2 Trish, 2 Valk, 3 Mirror, 3 Kaleidoscope, all the copies of Shrit I needed, and the most important part, 3 Bryanak. The most important card by far. My deck became streamlined, and Jacob, piloting my Synchro and Cyber Dragon deck on my behalf, just didn't stand a chance. But the Secret Forces is a lot more than just Necrons. There were 2 other archetypes in there as well. Ritual Beasts, and the one that Jacob had his eye on, Yosenju. I didn't need it, so I gave Jacob all of the Yosenju cards. After he finished helping me test my Necros deck, we then worked on his Yosenju deck. 3 Karma 1, 3 Karma 2, 3 Karma 3, 3 Suki, the Pendulums. We were even lucky enough to pull a single copy of Yosenju dieback. After his deck was built, we tested it against my Synchros, and it won. Then Cyber Dragons. It won again, which was interesting to me. Clearly it was quite good, so why not? Yosenju versus Necros. Let's go. So it turns out, a deck that can lock you out of special summoning doesn't mean much to a deck that normal summons 4 times a turn. We played a best of 5, and to my complete shock, it went to game 5. Sure, I won, but it was close. Way too close to call. I think it was obvious to us that we could play 100 games and probably win 50 each. I had found my overpowered deck, and so had Jacob. I wanted to test my Necros deck against people like Martin and Zach, but life was busy for them, and it never really worked out. So in a search for newer and greater opponents to test my deck on, Jacob and I ventured into a world foreign to both of us, tournaments. Game Traders wasn't just a place to buy cards, they also hosted tournaments. Every Sunday, you could go and test your skill. They also hosted doubles nights every 4 weeks, usually at the end of the month, and they also hosted double priced nights. That included double prizing, every 4 weeks, usually in the middle of the month. Jacob and I went, Necros and Yasenju, 2 top tier, unbeatable decks. Or so I thought. We both finished with a rather sad score of 0 and 4. I did not know what a pendulum was, I did not know what a Satellanite was, and I did not know what to do in a Necros mirror match. It was rough, but it was also motivating. Tournaments were kind of scary, it was against people I didn't know, playing a game I was still mostly learning, against cards I hadn't seen, in a public place doing something that I guess wasn't normal. But it didn't matter. Losing just made me want to do better. There wasn't a lot I could do to upgrade my deck more, so instead I focused more on learning it. I looked up videos, combos, listened to deck profiles, more so around the tech cards and why to include them. Tons of stuff. I had versed someone with the same deck as me. Not once did he play a card that I didn't own. He just played it better. And I hated that. I hated that more than you could ever know. So I practiced. I would sit on the floor of my room playing against myself. I would practice going second, I would practice going first. Whatever I could do, I tried it out. And then Jacob and I came back to play in Game Trader's unique monthly format, Doubles. Now tell me the things you were loving about behind my back. Definitely, I hold this heart to break down. It's too late for apologies. It's going down. We went 2-2, a much better showing, but the highlight for me was round 4, where Jacob and I played a mirror match. Somehow, both him and the other Yusenju player drew poor hands, so it basically became a one-on-one in a Necros mirror, and it was a mirror I won. I beat someone else using Necros with Necros. We did lose a round to a Cleafort team, and also to this one team running double mermails. Funnily enough, to me at least, it felt like a good place to stop. I went to the Gauntlet of Champions and proved at the very least that I could hang and compete. Sure, I didn't win, that's not a big deal, right? It's not all about winning, right? It's not about winning. It's not about winning. It's about winning. The timeline here gets a little funny. If you're a Yu-Gi-Oh buff, you might have picked correctly that we are, as of this point in time, somewhere deep into 2015. But after this doubles tournament, things got quiet for a bit. I think the enthusiasm died off. I would still go and play at Brett's house, but we played more Guitar Hero than we did Yu-Gi-Oh! My Necros deck was such a jump in power that his wind-up deck, now considered the old school deck between the two, didn't really stand a chance. Mind you, it wasn't Brett's fault. He was a phenomenal player, but Necros was a deck made to counter decks like wind-ups, and Brett reasonably didn't want to spend the same amount of money that I did to build a new deck to compete, and he wasn't interested in going to tournaments with me. Things in Yu-Gi-Oh! Got quiet, and whenever we did play, we'd play Synchro versus wind-ups because it was more fun. Jacob, I think, went through a similar journey. He had this really fun Yusenju deck that he couldn't use. Nick didn't have a deck, and when he got to play, it was against people like Zach, who, yes, put up a great challenge, but not really enough of a challenge. Despite having a small Burning Abyss package, Zach's deck was old. His deck didn't really have any solutions to deal with Jacob's Yusenjus, and Zach wasn't interested in finding one. Going into the end of 2015, Jacob and I got a chance to play again, Necros versus Yusenju, and it was a nail-biter. It reignited that spark in both of us, and after that game we had a brief conversation to ask the question that we were thinking. Should we go to tournaments, like, every week? Our first two trips to our local tournament scene were kind of awkward. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players are a unique and a slightly not normal breed. I bring this up because at the time it was a gate that kept me from going to the local scene more than I otherwise would have, but the competition was intoxicating, and Jacob and I finally said, fuck it, let's go. 2016 was going to be our year. Until...
Brian at one, Unicorns at one.
This time, goddamn, Brio and Unicorn are at one. So if banning sure it wasn't enough, Brio and Unicorn now at one. Necros is like officially dead.
November 9th, 2015. The first ban list that really, really hurt me. Unicorn to 1, Bryonic to 1, and Charit banned. My Necros deck was in tatters. Jacob and I started going to tournaments right after this ban list, and those tournaments were rough. Every week was the same thing. I'd lose 3 games with barely a fighting chance, and then play either against a child, a troll, or someone running a deck that could be described as dog water, and if I was lucky, maybe I'd win, and sometimes even then, I wouldn't. Jacob had... well, he had a little bit of better success than me, but Yusenjus weren't working as well for him as they used to. The meta was changing, and both of us were floundering. I hated losing. It thankfully wasn't discouraging for me, it just made me want to go back to the lab, practice, and come back stronger, but this cycle went on for a long time. It took a bit of a breakthrough for me to find my footing. A breakthrough I really want to tell you guys about. To put the brakes on the story a bit, I want to tell you guys about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. Getting back into the game made me get back into the show. In particular, the newest season, Arc 5. And man, I could write a whole ass script on that mess of a show. Maybe I will. That's a good next video idea. Anyway, I think that the first 2 seasons of Arc 5 were genuinely incredible. And at this point in the timeline, Season 3 wasn't even close to coming out yet. And I think Season 2 was still mid-airing. It had been going on long enough that I was introduced to my favorite character, Akaba Reggie. This man dueled like he was a real-life pro, slinging together synchros, fusions, XYZs, pendulums, literally every summoning mechanic, and chaining them and making them work together. In the show, he was a beast with his DDD deck, going undefeated up until that point. And every time he dueled, my eyes were glued to the screen. I wanted so badly to play DDDs, but sadly the card pool just wasn't there. DDDs are one of the most robbed archetypes in history, with many of the cards being delayed, pushed back, not printed, and instead we got stuff like Leonidas, Dark, when what we really wanted were cards like Hell Armageddon and Flame King Genghis. We wouldn't get these cards for a long, long time. So despite me owning 3 of every DDD card, it was an unplayable mess not worth considering. Bulk trash. The next couple of weeks at the tournament scene were rough, and I went through, as I like to call it, a deck identity crisis. I tried Synchro, didn't have much success. I switched to Cyber Dragons, not much luck there either. I tried Masked Heroes, no good. Picked up Pendulum Magicians, had some success, not nearly enough. Week after week I struggled, and I know Jacob was having similar issues between his Yusendus and some other decks he was trying to build but just couldn't find the cards for. After weeks of this, I finally hit my breaking point. I hated losing, and I hate it more than you could possibly know. So I said, fuck it. I'm trying all these different decks and different ideas, and nothing is working. Even when I played Necros, a tier 1 deck, it didn't work well. Something had to change. So I decided to do some research into our local scene's top players. What were they doing to win week after week? I narrowed the upper echelon of our local's best players down to 3. A guy named Matt, undisputably our best player, Draco, a serious contender week after week, and Will, a personal bracket demon for me. What were they doing that I wasn't? Matt was a tried and tested Mermail player. Even without the new support, he was a fiercely loyal devotee to his deck, and had been playing it essentially for years. Every time the meta changed, he would stick with Mermails, and do his best to adapt his deck to the changing landscape. He would later switch to Monarchs when that came out, but when he did, he stuck with Monarchs for years after that. He was a deck loyalist, and because of that, he knew every possible interaction and every little detail, and the tricks that the deck could pull off. Draco was similar, except he was in love with Infernoids. No matter what the meta was, he would bring Infernoids, always testing the limits of his deck against the meta. Will was a Cyber Dragon specialist, always including some sort of tech card like Galaxy Soldiers for rank 5 plays, Electromagnetic Turtle since it was a light machine, Kaiju packages. He stuck with his one deck and pushed it seemingly as far as it would go. These 3 players taught me that, to a certain extent obviously, it wasn't what you played but how you played it. That being loyal to a deck meant that the deck could be loyal to you. I just had to find that one deck, stick to it, upgrade it, and adapt it to the meta. Preferably, it should be a deck that should be scheduled for new support in the future, so that way I can really commit it for the long haul. But what deck fit that description? I decided to take another look at DDDs, and I really thought about it. Not in terms of weaknesses, but in terms of strengths. Infernoids, Mermails, Cyberdragons, they all had weaknesses, but our top 3 players didn't care about that. They focused on what the deck could do, not what it couldn't. They pushed it. So what could DDDs do? Well, it was consistent. It had a searcher, and it had a searcher for the searcher. And its grind game was good too, since the searcher was a continuous spell, it could be used every turn. It was also very good at spitting out large bodies. Lots of 2000 plus attack point monsters that could summon themselves or summon others. Swirl Slime was also amazing. It was both the fusion spell and the fusion material in one, meaning I didn't need to run polymerization. And it could banish itself from the grave to summon another DDD monster from hand. In testing, I could use Swirl Slime with Leonidas to summon Dark, and then I could banish Swirl to summon Ragnarok and get back Leonidas. Just insane. And then I thought about it further. Leonidas is a level 7, Dark is a level 7. I could do rank 7 XYZ monsters like Big Eye, Flare Metal, and Dracosac. The more I thought about what the deck could do, as opposed to what it couldn't, I started to realize that DDDs wasn't bad. Actually, it was quite good. It could do a lot. If a match went to time, I could use Dark and Leonidas to modulate my life points. A cheeky trick, but potentially a match-winning trick. Flare Metal could also help me win in time. And lastly, DDDs had 2 insanely powerful boss monsters, Duodorn King Kali Yuga, the ultimate board breaker, and a counter to pendulums, and Wave High King Caesar Ragnarok, letting me punch over just about anything, and being a consistent answer to Cleafort Towers. There weren't very many good monsters, so I started the deck building process. 3 Savant Kepler, 3 Ragnarok, 3 Swirl Slime, 3 Necro Slime, 3 Leonidas, and 3 Berthamant. Only 18 monsters. I did experiment with some of the other ones, but quickly realized that they were useless. 18 monsters isn't very many, but the gate contracts could search them, so it was kind of like I had 21 monsters. And if I put in a few draw cards, like Max C, that would help me see those monsters faster. I ended up playing 3 copies of Upstart Goblin eventually. I would always play as many as the ban list would allow. I threw in some extra gates, a couple of power spells, eventually found a Lure of Darkness for more draw power, and I also ran a single copy of Glow Up Bulb, allowing me to do level 8 synchro plays like Stardust Dragon, and then later, when it released, Scarlight and Psyframe Lord Omega. And my deck was ready to go, and it was time to try it out. My first run with the deck was good. I went 2-2. Not bad, but not great, but the goal was to commit to the deck. My losses exposed some weaknesses, some dead cards, so I tried to focus on those weaknesses, add some techs, change the side deck, extra deck. I cut things out like King Tell and added some other stuff instead. And then we just repeated this process. Week after week, I saw improvement, and then finally I got to play Matt, who was running Monarchs. He extra deck locked me over and over again, and I found creative ways around it. I could use my own form of tribute summoning and even pendulum summoning to break the lock, and I ended up beating him 2-1. Slowly, I started to verse more and more meta decks. I was crushing anyone who tried using pendulums. Monarchs, I had outs to. Cyber Dragons, I could OTK on the crackback. Same with Infernoids, stealing their monsters with Big Eye and Wave High King to keep them out of the grave. I found little nuances for each type of matchup. Wave High King doesn't target, allowing unique outs. Dark was winning me the matches in time. I was going into every match knowing what my opponent was running and have specific sides and game plans. And if it didn't work, I would lab some more and come back next week. never, ever stopped believing, not for a moment, that if I fully committed myself to the idea that DDDs could beat anyone, then eventually they would. Round after round, week after week, opponent after opponent, adjustment after adjustment, and then, finally. It only happened once with DDDs, but I did do it. With my weird, bad, rogue deck, I did somehow manage to get the perfect 4-0. And I went home the champion of locals. I couldn't stop smiling, and it wasn't just that I won, but it was how much effort I put into winning. And to see the results, it was the best feeling in the world. I didn't do it with a meta deck, I did it my way, with my deck. And for a brief moment, I was on top of the mountain. Probably one of the greatest moments of my life. Next week, I went again, and with no issues, I crushed Cosmo, I crushed Burning Abyss, I crushed Monarchs, and I went into round 4 undefeated. And sitting across from me at the table, also undefeated, was Jacob. It turns out that this journey of deck discovery that I went on wasn't exclusive to me. Jacob also found a deck that he loved, seemingly a rogue tier option, a deck he fell in love with just in terms of concept and artwork, a deck that I had honestly written off as being bulk garbage, clearly not learning my lessons from piloting DDDs. Jacob showed up at the final table ready to make sure that I had learnt it, because he smashed me with Fluffles. Fluffles was this weird deck that I could never quite pilot properly, even if I tried. It was fast, it was aggressive, it rolled the dice a lot on top decks and lucky draws. It consistently killed me in one turn, every turn. Jacob had quite literally been hitting me for so much damage that I could sometimes have had as high as 20,000 life points, and it wouldn't have saved me. At the time, I thought I had piloted the most niche deck possible to a first place finish. But to my dismay, Jacob 2-0'd me to take an even more niche deck to first place. And unlike me, he did it more than once. My DDDs became a bracket demon for a lot of people, and I was consistently going 3-1 every single week. But Jacob, he was up there with Matt and Draco as regular local winners. And unlike them, he played Fluffles, probably the weirdest deck at our locals. From here, and in my memory, it honestly felt like a lot happened in a surprisingly very short amount of time. Because Jacob and I were going to locals every single week without fail, and we were regulars. We got to know a lot of people. Turns out Matt is a pain to play against because he is such a difficult opponent, but he's also a really funny guy. Draco had a lot of enthusiasm about everything he did, and just was an overall pleasant guy to be around. We got to know other people like Benny, sometimes known as Moneybags, because the guy worked as a salesman for Ferrari and owned 3 fucking Minervas, which back then was still a prize card. Although Benny wasn't to be confused with Ben, a consistent high-tier opponent who was always goofing off. I got to meet tons of people, Raul, Isaac, Declan, Michael, Hayden, Tyson, and I started making some real friends at the event. Our locals were good, they were sometimes attracting 30 to 40 people, and week by week I began to forge friendships, rivals. I had certain people I really wanted to avoid playing, others I knew were free wins. As time went on, Jacob and I both started building some side decks just for fun. At one point I put together Dark Synchro, a deck that focuses on summoning Cyframe Omega and Trishula as many times as possible to banish an opponent's entire hand. This led to so many great memories, like when I made someone deck out after they dropped Max C on me. And another time when I versed a kid who was obviously cheating. All day he'd been rigging his deck with 4 pieces of Exodia in hand and 1 on the top, so if he drew, he'd win. Me though, I just banished his whole hand. Around this time, 2 new players entered the scene named Corey and Lachlan. I couldn't tell you why, but seeing them running their awkward, bad decks resonated with me and Jacob, who, in a sense, each respectively took them under our wing, gave them cards, ideas, strategies, helped them improve week over week. They became 2 of our closest friends, and the 4 of us rocked up to events as a powerhouse team. As the year went on, as planned, new DDD support dropped, as well as new Fluffle support. My deck changed quite heavily from a rank 7 deck into a rank 6 deck, now using cards like Savant Nicola, Genghis, and Puppet Master to make powerful rank 6s. And I could also use Savant Thomas to make rank 8s like Titanic Galaxy. Jacob in the meanwhile got new Fluffles to play with, but became more creative, figuring out ways to make the deck strong going first, using cards like Wolf and Tiger to make rank 6s, using multiple Sabertooths for Titanic Galaxy, using a cheeky glow-up bulb with a Fluffle dog to make Naturia Beast. We were getting better, more creative, and whilst I wasn't going 4-0 often, the 2 of us were serious contenders week after week, Jacob more so than me. After months of Fluffles, DDDs, Jacob and I, to a certain extent, I think we started to get a bit sick of our respective decks and wanted to make a change. Going into the end of 2016, we both spotted decks on the horizon that we were interested in. I would end up building Blue Eyes, a wonderfully powerful deck that I would end up taking to my first ever regionals. Sadly, Jacob never really got to take his ABC deck to regionals, as the regionals that we went to happened to be on the very same day that the structure deck was released. I ended up going an impressive 4-2, but sadly missed top 16. I had a lot of fun though, and it was cool to go with all of our friends. In the weeks following, Jacob would finally build his ABC deck, using cards like Transmodify, Galaxy Soldier. He would usually end on boards of ABC Buster Drake and Cyber Dragon Infinity. He also used a fun tech card, Torque Tuning Gear, to make Omega, Scarlight, and even Trishula. My Blue Eyes deck wasn't nearly as creative, but I did run my own Galaxy Soldier package, which was great to discard stones or dragons where needed. Together with Blue Eyes and ABC, Jacob and I officially rose to the upper echelon of our locals. We didn't win every week, but we won just about as much as anyone else. At this point, Matt, Isaac, and Raul were regular winners every single week, but so were me and Jacob, a solid 5-way fight for the win every week. That was until one week when a new challenger stepped into the ring. I was running hot with Blue Eyes. Easy 3-0, one more game and I'd come first in locals. I knew Jacob was running hot, but he failed in round 3 to secure a win. I managed to talk to him before round 4 started, and he told me that he lost to a guy I'd never heard of. A newcomer named Slayde.
Who is Slayde? Who is Slayde? Who is Slayde?
I need you to know that stuff like this did not happen. We knew everyone at locals. If you were new to our local scene, then enjoy the next couple months of poor results while you work your play out. Slayde was not like that, particularly because he used to go to a different local scene and had recently moved to ours. This guy just showed up and in his first week defeated everyone, including me, in a surprisingly not close game at all to win locals. Slayde was notable for 2 reasons. One, he was a really chill guy, and Jacob and I instantly became great friends with him. And 2, he played Dino Mists. Dino Mists. Dino Mists? This bulk bin trash? But yeah, Dino Mists. It was surprisingly an aggressive deck that could OTK you out of nowhere, with double attacks, limited removals, unaffected cards to push through boards. I lost to Slayde going first due to his insane turn 2 plays, but game 2, I switched things up and let him go first. Big mistake. He made Cyber Dragon Infinity, and then went through the whole Draco package to end on a Titanic Galaxy. I was, for a lack of a better word, cooked. Slayde, for all intents and purposes, became my new rival following that day. I had an obsession with beating him. With opponents like Jacob, Matt, Raul, I could beat them about as often as they beat me. But Slayde? I could never beat him. Not once. He became my bracket demon to end all bracket demons. And he wasn't just a bracket demon, he was a serious player, and quickly became the winningest player at our locals, seemingly overnight. He would occasionally drop a set to people like Draco and people like Raul, but other than that, he was virtually untouchable. As we approached the end of 2016, I was in a frenzy. I could not accept that there was a player that I couldn't beat. I had also gotten sick of losing, I liked winning locals, I wanted to win locals. With Blue Eyes consistently failing to Slayde, I tried pivoting to a Metal Foes strategy, using things like Cleeforts to make Cyber Dragons, Magispectors to make Totem Bird, and Kieran. It was a great deck, but it wasn't enough to beat Slayde. It was only in a moment of reflection that I really sat back and thought about why Slayde was winning and why I was losing. And when I thought about it like that, I laughed and realized I'd forgotten my lesson. Slayde was a deck specialist, and I was switching it up rather than committing to a strategy. Blue Eyes didn't work, so I switched to Metal Foes. Metal Foes didn't work, so I decided we're going to do one last switch, for real this time, back to DDDs. I made sure to side deck cards that could hurt Dynamis. Cards like System Down, I streamlined my combos, added certain techs like a single copy of Farfa and a Beatrice for my rank 6 strategy. I showed up next week and we played. I did it. I beat Slayde. DDDs was my baby. It was my pet deck, and when I put my faith into it, it didn't let me down. Let's put the brakes on for a minute and talk about Jacob. This whole story started with me and Brett, but if it wasn't clear, this whole story, is more about me and Jacob. Jacob, at this point in time, had been one of my best friends, if not my actual best friend, for nearly 6 years. We met at the start of high school and always had the ability to think on the same wavelength and yap about, well, anything for hours. He was just about as addicted to locals as I was, and was simultaneously such a creative deck builder and an insanely good player. Jacob had a tendency to cook a little too hard during the deck building process, but his playlines were creative, so varied, and so genuinely unstoppable. Shortly after I jumped back into DDDs is when Jacob asked, since I wasn't using Metal Foes, if he could borrow the cards. I said yes, and what he brought the following weeks just blew my mind. Metal Foes Yang Zing. A deck that, honestly, once you read any Metal Foes card, and once you read any Yang Zing card, will probably make your eyes go wide as you put the pieces together. And piloting it, Jacob began to put up boards that were so insane, and he was so frequently putting up more card negates than players would have cards in their hand. He always had a fuck it we ball attitude when Max C came down, and it seemed to work out for him. Jacob did make the decision not to run his deck during doubles nights, as it was too susceptible to effect failures and ghost ogres, and with twice the amount of hands, it was likely that he would run into it. So he kept Metal Foes as a single player deck. For doubles though, him and I teamed up with a strategy I couldn't believe we hadn't tried before. ABC DDDs. I always wanted to be the best. I always wanted to win so much that I was the man to beat. Despite winning locals a decent amount of times, I had never really claimed that spot of number one. But for a few short months, I did get to experience that feeling in doubles, because ABC DDDs became the deck to beat at locals. In retrospect, I don't think we ever dropped a game. Running that strategy month after month, we would show up, bounce off of each other, and just crush the competition. One funny story I have around this time is when Jacob and I unexpectedly played a mirror match, ABC and DDDs versus ABC and DDDs. The thing is, Jacob runs a one-off copy of Ghost Reaper and drew it, so after banishing all the copies of ABC Buster Dragon from his opponent's extra deck, it was basically over on turn 1. Doubles gave me a chance to feel what it was like to be number 1. A feeling I loved deeply. And I wanted so badly to translate that into my singles success. And there was hope on the horizon that I would get my chance. After over years of delays, DDD was finally getting its structure deck. And with it, all the insanely powerful support, like Siegfried, Lamia, Alexander, Savant Copernicus. DDDs were going to be eating good, spitting out Titanic Galaxy, Siegfried, and Crystal Wing literally every single turn. Something else that notably happened leading up to this was the release of a card called Pot of Desires, a card that I thought was insanely good, a card that literally everyone at my local scene thought was a piece of Neg 9, overhyped, overpriced trash.
There's a lot of controversy and polarization around this card. It's kind of divided the community because half the community loves this card to pieces, and the other half thinks it's absolute shit.
The risk of banishing cards you need is a lot. It's not worth it because you're banishing 10 to only get 2. Let me ask another question though, because I already brought up, you're losing 10 to only get 2. Would you give somebody $10 to get 2 back?
This is a +2!
It's a neg 10.
No, it's not!
Yes, it is.
Banishing cards from the top of your deck, so you can never see them again. It's not a neg!
Though, through some genuinely insane series of events, I actually ended up with a playset and religiously ran it at 3 in my DDD deck. For those curious, I pulled one, very lucky, and someone next to me pulled another, also very lucky, but they didn't want it and were happy to trade with me to get rid of it. It costed me a few high rarity cards, but all things I could live without. And then finally Draco had a friend who later also pulled one, didn't know what it was, read it, thought it sucked, and just gave it to me. I was sure to tell the guy how much it was worth, but he didn't care. He knew I thought it was good and gifted it to me. I very quickly became known as the Pot of Desires guy at the local scene, as I was literally the only player who would play the card, and it certainly translated into a lot of success. I watched as week after week players would shake their heads at me for playing such a terrible card, banishing 10 off the top of my deck like it was nothing, only to then watch as I drew the nuts and comboed them into oblivion. With the momentum on my side, I went into 2017 on fire. There was another regionals on the horizon, scheduled to happen sometime in late February. I would take DDDs to it and win. I was excited. 2017 was going to be my year. Sure enough, I built the deck. I rocked up to locals, and yeah, I went 4-0. Easy. It was obvious to everyone that with the release of the structure deck, DDD had switched from a rogue tier to a tier 1 deck. Across from our locals was a McDonald's that a lot of us would go to after tournaments to hang out at. The staff knew who we were at this point and let us take over a part of the restaurant to hang out and play cards. I remember following that locals, so many people bought the structure deck and asked for my advice on how to build it. Advice that I was all too happy to give. I watched half a dozen people start to adopt and enjoy the deck that I loved, and I loved seeing that. Deep in my heart though, I knew that there were problems with DDD, and they were about to catch up with me. 21 days. DDD, after all of its delays and setbacks, finally got a chance to shine as a tier 1 deck for 21 days. That was until a new set was scheduled to release called Raging Tempest, a set that would introduce the game's most powerful deck ever made, Zodiac.
Zodiac Beast leading 70% of all the top deck lists and available lists were Zodiac Beast. So 7 out of 10 were Zodiac Beast. So that means, as you see here, about 9% of the OCG metagame can be quote unquote considered as being a rogue deck. So that that means ABCs, Infernoids as well, the frog decks, the Paleozoic frog decks, all currently one of the best decks in the TCG, but they can be considered, well, rogue in the OCG just because Zodiac Beast and variants are so good.
The problem with Zodiac for me was not that it was good, but that it also had a really good matchup against DDDs. I thought about the matchup for days leading up to the set release, and in an ideal world, with players playing properly, DDD could do nothing. There was also another problem. I didn't like the DDD support. I know, right? Like, that sounds weird. DDD was fun for me because it was experimental, rogue. I could take the deck in seemingly hundreds of different directions, and the play lines were so varied. There was no hard set combo, it was all free flow, malleable. It was a deck that was solely mine, a canvas to play the game the way that I wanted to play it. And the structure deck, in upgrading it, had fundamentally changed it. It created an optimal way to play the deck, with any deviation from that being considered inoptimal. Every time I tried to add tech cards, it really just felt like I was making the deck worse. Somewhere along the way, in becoming a good and strong deck, DDDs had lost their identity. And with the new playlines and the release of Zodiac, I stopped having fun playing the deck. And I surprised everyone by dropping it following Raging Tempest's release. Following Raging Tempest, Jacob got unexpectedly really lucky with a couple of pack pulls, and somehow landed a full Zodiac core, the Trident, the Broad Bull, and even 3 Barrages. He even had a copy of MX Saber Invoker. On top of all of that, he also managed to secure 2 copies of Totally Awesome, allowing his Fluffles to use Penguin into Bahamut Shark and Toad. Jacob was thriving, whilst I was floundering. Regionals was fast approaching, and other than DDDs, which I didn't want to play, I didn't really have a deck to bring. It was coincidentally at this time I had a small visit to Brett's place. I had managed to pull together a bunch of Cosmo cards and gave them to Brett as a sort of Christmas present and thank you for helping me get into the game. We were playing at his place and I was just venting my frustration about the DDD situation, about what deck to bring to regionals. Brett said if it was him, he would just bring wind-ups. He laughed, and later that night we played, and Brett put down Wind-Up Magician. He summoned Shark. He summoned another Shark. And something in my brain clicked. 2 level 4 waters. Bahamut Shark. Totally awesome. But Brett didn't do that. He decreased their levels to level 3 to go into Zenmanes, which needed 2 level 3s. 2 level 3s could make MX Saber Invoker, all at once my brain made all the connections. I came up with quite possibly the single most batshit idea I've ever had for a deck. Before Brett could finish his turn, I stood up suddenly and begged him, pleaded him, could I borrow his wind-up cards for the regional tournament? A proposition he laughed at and happily agreed to. Surprisingly, it didn't take a lot of begging to get Jacob to lend me his Zodiac cards. He decided to run Metal Foes Yang Zing for the event anyways, and so with a borrowed Wind-Up Core, a borrowed Zodiac Core, and a couple of Speedroid cards and staples, I had constructed what is still to this day the most unique deck idea I've ever put together. One I've never been able to find replicated online: Wind-Up Zodiac. The idea was simple. If I drew wind-ups, I could use them to go into a Zodiac combo, and if I drew Zodiac combo and a wind-up, then I could spam Magician Shark and Magician Shark to make Totally Awesome and Rafflesia, on top of the Zoo combo. Regional day came, and it was time to play. To my absolute shock, we attracted a hell of a crowd. Over 300 entrants. Round 1, and I was surprisingly placed on table 1, against someone who, apparently was an Australian YuGiOh commentator? I don't know. I was very nervous round 1, and I lost his ABC deck. Not a good start. But there were 5 more rounds to go, and losing round 1, while not good for my record, did help clear my nerves. So I dusted myself, took a mental breather, drank a Monster Energy drink, and got ready for round 2. Round 2, I played against a very nervous team playing DDDs. It was such a fast match, partially because I knew DDDs in and out, I knew all the weak spots, and shut the deck down before it even got started. Round 3 was definitely my most difficult match of the whole tournament. I was playing against someone running 60 card Shadow Light Swarm. He even had a Minerva, which was still a prize card at this point. It went to game 3, and our game 3 went for so long that the judge came and just sat at our table, as we were the last table still playing that round. With a couple of cheeky swings in, I managed to have enough life points to win in time. We drew a crowd, and people got to saw my wind-up cards in action. Round 4 was nerve-wracking, as I ended up playing against someone running pure Zodiac. I got to go first game 1, did not draw a single wind-up card, but my Zoo combo was strong enough to make an unbreakable board and take it. Game 2, he went first, did his board. I tried to play into it using Terratop and Barrage, but he quickly shut that down. After getting him to burn a few interruptions, I then smacked down Magician Shark and proceeded to pop off. I remember this game so well because my opponent was totally mind-blown and starstruck that I was playing Wind-Up Zodiac for the event. I took the game with a bit of totally awesome control and proceeded to round 5 in high spirits. Round 5, I played against another ABC player. I was nervous about it after round 1, but this guy wasn't as switched on of a player as the first guy was. It also helped that I won the dice roll, drew my dimensional barriers, and he didn't run the Galaxy Soldier package. Finally, round 6. I was entering with a score of 4-1. My opponent was... Unfortunate. Realizing that in his 34 card deck, not a single card can out the game state he has just put himself in, he lets out a sigh, extends his hand, and surrenders to me. And so, after 2 years of blood, sweat, and a whole lot of money, I managed to pilot Wind Up Zodiac to a top 16 finish at a massive regional event, just barely missing out on top 8. I ended up having the same scoreline, 5-1, as a lot of the people who were in top 8, but the problem was that I lost my round 1, whereas other people more lost later on in the tournament, so they were more favoured to be included in the top 8. I couldn't have been happier. Following the tournament, Lachlan, Corey, Jacob and me all laughed, hung out, cheered, had a few drinks, and celebrated a fun tournament, one for the ages. In the following days, I begrudgingly handed back the Zodiac and Wind-Up cards I borrowed. Jacob was okay with it, but to be fair, I had robbed him of his ability to play his deck at a regionals again, so he was going to take Zodiac and make something of it at the local level. As for me though, I knew I wanted to build a new deck, D2Ds just wasn't really cutting it for me, so I looked to the future for ideas.
Here's the part of the video where I'll do a little bit explaining. Alright, so if you look at the monster zone, basically if you want to special summon an extra deck monster, let's just use Dark Rebellion Sea Dragon as an example. Basically, you don't initially summon it in these monster zones. In the regular 5 monster zones you guys know and love, we have 2 new monster zones, and the first time you would summon like Armor Master or Dark Rebellion Sea Dragon, it goes in one of these zones. But if you summon a Link monster, since Link monsters have cursors all over, they have Link cursors all over the cards and they point in different directions. Since his Link cursors point diagonal down, left and right, that means that you can summon extra deck monsters in those zones.
Konami had announced the new master rule, Link summoning, and I was pissed. Pendulums nerfed, and all extra deck summoning methods nerfed. The only extra deck card that would thrive in this new format were Link monsters, thus forcing us to abandon our pet decks and buy Konami's new cards. I was tired of DDDs anyway, but let's say I wasn't, DDD stood no chance in this new format. So with this in mind, I decided to build a deck that I thought would be 1, fun, and 2, good in a Link's era format. And it wasn't so much the deck that caught my eye, but the card. My hardest match at regionals was against 60 card Shaddoll Lightsworn, running a card that blew my mind when I read it. That grass looks greener. I wanted to build a grass deck, so I decided to take a page out of Draco's book and build Infernoids. Pot of Desires was even better in a grass world, as 60 cards meant less chance of banishing 3 copies of my staples. So with 3 pots, 3 grass, 3 left arm, 2 snow, and metric ton of Infernoid cards, I poured probably a bit too much money into my new deck, and man, when I brought it to locals, it became apparent that it was the most powerful deck I have ever played, and it was not close. I showed up to locals as a titan. People would make these insane, ridiculous end boards, and I would obliterate them with a pool of seemingly endless resources. But I wasn't the only one with a new deck on the block. Jacob had arrived running his Zodiacs, along with a blast from the past, Yosenju's. As if trying to one-up the ridiculousness that was my wind-up zoo, Yosenzu was a deck that fundamentally just worked. It played around so many floodgates, especially vanities and maxi. It could spam rank 4s, they were beast warriors so Tenki could search them too. It was a phenomenal deck. The zoos, especially with the second wave of support, could do anything, and Yosenzu was there to pick up the slack on the things that they couldn't. With our final boss decks, 60 card Infernoids and Yosenzu, we went to locals on a tear. Jacob and I, well, we had always been in contention for the best. For months, maybe even a whole year, we were consistently top tier threats at our local scene. But Yosenzu and Infernoids was where we rose to become the players to beat. I'm pretty sure that during our time with those decks, only one of the two of us would win locals every week. The competition was insanely fierce, as Zodiac decks were everywhere, and Corey and Lachlan had risen to become top tier threats. But Jacob and I, we were unstoppable. So the only question remained, out of the two of us, which one was better? I tried my best, and Infernoids gave him a lot of trouble, but come week after week, Jacob proved pretty consistently that he was the better player out of the two of us. He just started pulling ahead. For months, we each enjoyed our time as our locals' best players before it all came crashing down.
Okay, new. They limited that grass looks greener. What the fuck?
May of 2017 is when a lot of things came crashing down for me. Firstly was the emergency ban list, which limited grass to a single copy, thus obliterating the consistency of Infernoids. The second change was more subtle, but it was the release of Maximum Crisis. A set I chose not to invest in, and I was punished pretty heavily for that, as this set would see the release of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, a card that my local scene pretty quickly learned was a hard counter to me, specifically, as I was the only one still running Desires, and I was also running Left Arm Offering. Ash could really turn Pot of Desires into a minus, and could make me lose the duel on the spot if used on my Left Arm Offering. Jacob got new support for Zoos that set and continued to pull further and further ahead, and meanwhile I started running into Ben every tournament, who had a playset of Ash and quickly became a bracket demon for me to deal with. Ben though was my last bracket demon, as I would never end up overcoming him. My Infernoid showed up week after week, and failed week after week. Jacob meanwhile held his own against the likes of Dinos and True Dracos. Yasenzu still proving to be a dominant deck, but he was starting to share the first place throne with a few people. Knowing I wouldn't be able to seriously compete with Infernoids going into a Link format, my motivation for the game slowly began to die off. I began bringing pet decks, like a version of Windups I had built that was focused around making double Utopia the Lightning and pushing for OTKs. It was fine, I never really went higher than 1-3. I brought Crystal Beast Metal Foes. Got a lot of head turns with that one, went 2-2, but the power level of other decks was just at a level I couldn't match. I turned to DDDs, but even then, 2-2, right where I thought it belonged in a Zoo Dino Draco meta. Every bad result only helped to discourage me more and more, and finally... July 21st. In the days leading up to it, I played one last tournament. For fun. I decided to play Brett's Windups. Not literally, I built a meek imitation of them, but yeah, I went 0-4. I decided going into it that it would be my last tournament, and I wanted to say goodbye with the deck that started it all, Windups. A deck I struggled against. A deck I had to go to the lab to beat. A deck that tested me, made me improve, made me learn, made me commit to a strategy and make it grow. I would get better, I'd try new things, I'd get a little closer, a little stronger. That journey, that deck, that challenge that started it all, I had repeated that cycle so many times, especially with Necros and now doubly so with DDDs. I had played, I had struggled, and above all else, I learned how to be a competitor. I made friends, formed teams, rivals, overcome so many challenges, and being able to stand atop the summit with a friend who walked that journey with me, even if it was just for a brief time, it meant everything, and it was a memory that I'll never forget. Following the implementation of Master Rule 4, I outright stopped going to local tournaments, and tournaments in general. I would occasionally still play the game online, via Duel Links, and years later Master Duel when it came out. A lot of my cards I sold off I ended up regretting, as I wanted to, quite badly, preserve my past decks, so I went on a bit of a financial journey to hunt down Blue Eyes cards, Infernoid cards, DDD cards, all so I could rebuild my decks. As I brought them to tournaments, I ended up amassing a collection of 40 odd decks, some of which I had brought to locals, others being random Time Wizard decks like 2001 Chaos Yada, X-Sabers, Gladiator Beasts, etc. The Gladiator Beast was a fun one, as it was actually a gift to me from Slayde, which I still have in their original sleeves today. I had a big group of friends who all loved YuGiOh, and with my insane piles of decks, I was able to give everyone at parties or gatherings a ton of options and variety to play and have fun with. I stopped going to locals, stopped competing, but I never stopped playing and having fun in my own way. But man, I avoided links like the plague. Whenever we would play at parties, it was always with Master Rule 3, meaning that we had the pendulum zones. Jacob did something similar, rebuilding his cherished Fluffles deck, ABC deck. They became fun picks for everyone's the events that we would host. Jacob went to a handful of locals following my departure, and apparently numbers died down a lot following Master Rule 4, but a lot of people that we knew still went and were doing better than ever. Following our absence, Corey and Lachlan became two of the players to beat, and went so much further than Jacob and I ever did, finishing top 8 in regionals and even top 8 in an Australian YCS. Whilst I wasn't going to tournaments, I would occasionally, between games, coach a kid named Ben. Not to be confused with this Ben, and not to be confused with this Ben, I know, sorry. And he messaged me years later to let me know that he won the National Dragon Championship. Those who don't know, Dragon being our term for the junior division. And I want you to know earnestly that even at my adult age, using my best decks and tricks, I couldn't have won that. It might be junior, but those Dragon players are no joke, seriously. The scene I left behind was something special, and seeing everyone I once knew go on to do bigger and better things made me smile. In a funny way, it felt special to be a part of their journey, even if it was fleeting. As life moved on, I got a dog, a mortgage, got married to that girl who called me a nerd, and hung my deck box up, busting out my cards mainly for parties and old friends. Other than that though, YuGiOh became an afterthought of my life. God knows it's terribly expensive, and I didn't have the cash to keep chasing first places anymore. YuGiOh, for all it meant to me, for all that it pushed me to do, was done. Until 2024. I couldn't quite tell you what prompted us to do it. But Jacob and I, well, we decided fuck it, let's go to a tournament. So we did our best to adopt our old decks for modern play, and went. And man, I think we both went 0-4. Modern power level is insane. But that was it. We were hooked again. Since returning to the scene, I ended up building Branded, and Jacob ended up building Labyrinth. But shortly into our return, the funniest little thing happened. ABC got some support, and so did Blue Eyes, allowing us to, 9 years later, competitively bring Blue Eyes and ABC back to the tournament scene. The best stories really do rhyme. And to make things even better, DDD support is on the horizon, and it looks really good, and really fun. It has an energy about it similar to older style DDDs that I am so excited to get into, despite how long it's been. Jacob and I may once again make ABC DDD, except this time with the new support it's most likely going to be called ABC DDD XYZ. YuGiOh is very silly. Our old local scene at Chermside is a lot quieter than it used to be, but it's fun. The players try to keep things casual and lighthearted, and I really respect that. I've been slowly getting better with Branded, which is easily the most complicated deck I have ever played. I know a lot of people say that DDD is a hard deck, but that deck just clicked with me instantly. Branded though, Oh my god, my brain hurts. I've been getting better though, and I even managed to go 3-1 at a tournament. I feel like if I just commit to Branded, I should be able to topple locals any day now. I just have to stay true to my deck and commit to it, and the deck will do right by me. And that is basically where our Yu-Gi-Oh journey ends. I know, it's ridiculous, right? A bunch of grown-ass men playing a children's game by spending too much money on overpriced cardboard. But I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything. Yu-Gi-Oh, for as cringe as this is about to sound, made me a better person. I learnt what it meant to be competitive, what it meant to face challenges and adversity. I made friends, and I really felt like by overcoming so much challenge, by overcoming so many rivals, so much adversity, by being forced to think creatively, it really improved my character. And even though getting your $600 deck banned into F tier status sucks more than, well, fucking anything, when I think back to it, I just remember the highs, the goods, the laughs, and the friends. And that means something. Thank you.